Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Critical Conversations with the Compass Foundation. I'm your host, Chris Hussein. I'm also the PRO of the foundation, and I want to thank you all for joining us once again for this new installment in 2023. I know that we could not have gotten here without your support and your opinions. We share in these conversations and it must be productive, and we have found it to be quite that. I've also noted that even some journalists and media personnel, they have also carried some of our programming. So I'm quite happy to see that. Tonight's episode is going to be a very interesting one. We are going to be discussing the events of the president, the nominees, everything surrounding that. In particular, we are going to zone in on the outgoing president of Trinidad and Tobago, Her Excellency Paula-Mae 𝗲𝗍, and of course, the two nominees that are right now in the political domain, I may say, that is being proposed by both major parties, the government and the opposition. I have with me tonight two persons who are going to assist in moderating, Ms. Shanta C. Prasad and also Safraz Ali, both friends to the campus, and they help us with many things behind the scenes. I also have, of course, on this Zoom with us, the president of the Campus Foundation. So I want to say good evening to her as well. She is a bit under the weather, so she's not with us here today on camera, but she's also here in spirit and virtually typing. I'm sure she'll be in the chat here typing with us. And of course, I mean, these two panelists need no introduction. Opposition Senator Jayanti Lakshmi-Dayal and political analyst Dr. Bishnu Raghunath. So welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Good night, everyone. Thank you for having us, for me.
So when we are discussing this issue of the outgoing president, we need to go back a bit. We need to start from the beginning, where she got support from both the government and the opposition about her nomination and being president. It was welcomed warmly. I think the country, we were in a very happy space to have the first female president. And of course, she had a very great track record. And then we would have seen a lot of events that took place. We saw conversations about her being absent. We saw conversations about is the office serving any purpose in Trinidad. We saw debatable moments, one being the police service, the police commissioner issue. And I mean, we can go on and on. So several debatable, controversial, interesting events that took place during her tenure. And of course, now she is outgoing and she would have served one term. I want to get your immediate feedback, Dr. Raghunath, on the president. Do you think, despite everything that people, in Trinidad, we like to talk, so despite all of the old talk, do you think that she served well?
Okay, so thank you again for having me. Let me just start off by saying that maybe I should preface my answer by going back to her predecessor, President Carmona, who, when he had given his inaugural speech, he said there were certain things that he could do and certain things he couldn't do, and certain things that that he could do and certain things that he couldn't do. Well, there was the expectation that he could have done a lot more, but we literally, we have to work within the ambit of a constitution. And the constitution prevents the president from exercising that degree of executive authority. So when you understand the functioning of the constitution, you have to understand that there are very much many limitations to the presidency. And in saying that the president could only do so much, of course, herein comes the question, can the president do a little bit more? Or can the president operate or should the president operate strictly in accordance with the limitations of the constitution and of her office? To some extent, we could say that in many instances, the president operated strictly in relation to what the Constitution and the procedures and privileges of her office. So she didn't go beyond, she didn't try to go beyond, she just simply stayed within her crease and batted as she would have done. Of course, there were instances when we would have seen, or there were concerns, and there still are concerns as to whether or not she allowed certain events to happen, which she should not have allowed if she was sticking strictly within the confines of the Constitution. But again, notwithstanding those few instances, from the point of view of working within the Constitution, she would have done that job in the context in which she would probably have taken the job. That's my introductory comments for now.
Senator Latchmedial, what are your views on this? What is your take on the outgoing president's role in this position?
Her role, or you mean the way she performed her duties for the past couple of years? Yes. You know, as Dr. Raghunath would have said, you know, the role is defined, yes, within our Constitution. What I thought is that, of course, the Police Service Commission debacle and the issue of the merit list sort of overshadowed the presidency. And, you know, the opposition took a particular stance, and I did as well, that it warranted further interrogation. Unfortunately, our Constitution is structured in such a way that without the majority or without the Parliament moving for certain procedures to be invoked under Section 36, there could be no inquiry moving forward. I think that damaged the image of the office of the presidency to a large extent. And so one of the things that, unfortunately, a person who had a remarkable legal career, you know, moving all the way up to a Court of Appeal judge, which is rare for women, particularly in this country. It's becoming a little more common now, which is one of the first, I think, if not, you know, still one of the very few women who were elevated to that level of sitting in the Courts of Appeal. And what was a very distinguished legal career has now, I think, been overshadowed somewhat by that particular debacle, not so much because of what happened. Yes, everyone has their views about what happened, but I think the lack of answers and the lack of clarification and the lack of further, it was almost as though there was a concerted effort to sweep the entire thing under the carpet, which simply fuels the fire and adds credibility to the view that something went wrong and there was a massive attempt at a cover-up, for want of a better word. Apart from that, I think, you know, of course, anybody knowing our history, you know that the presidency is sort of an evolved way of looking at the monarchy, right? And if you look at other countries where you had sort of a ceremonial head of state in the form of the monarchy and so on, you know that countries moving into the 21st century looked to the monarchy as not just a historical, something that's just there, an institution that you just have to keep and support with the taxpayers' dollars, but you wanted some value from it. And the monarchy in England actually evolved in a way that tried to bring a little more, value to the people who support them. And that was a way of keeping the monarchy alive. And I think that the office of the president needs to evolve a little bit. And one thing that stands out to me, there were a couple examples, but one of the things that stood out to me particularly, and to many people during the course of this particular presidency, perhaps because she was the first woman president, that Her Excellency's silence when the country was in an uproar over the issue of violence against women. There were a couple of weeks where we had several gatherings, public gatherings, and sort of like, an outpouring of grief, anger, frustration, and several calls being made for action when it came to violence against women on the heels of the Ashanti Riley and Andrea Barrett murders, right? And of course, it was a public discussion. It was in the media every day, dominating media, and there was silence from the office of the president until I think International Women's Day. That a written message was delivered. Now, I'll tell you what that says to me, and I consider myself to be sort of like, I say old young, right? Like I'm in the middle there. I don't consider myself a young person like some of you. I don't consider myself an older person. I consider myself one of those people who grew up in that generation where we understood the politics of Patrick Manning and 𝗪𝗪𝗪, and we saw it, and now we're looking at the politics as we go forward, and we're looking at what happens around the world with the Rishi Sunaks and the Obamas and things like that, right? We're moving along. And I thought that it reminded me of when there was this outpouring of grief over the death of Princess Diana. And nobody in the United Kingdom expected the royal family to respond in such a way, but the public pressure for a response. I don't know if you all may be too young to remember 1997, but you remember the Queen actually doing a televised message about the death of Diana and all of this, which was so unprecedented at the time. But you respond, even though you're technically a ceremonial figurehead, you respond to what the people want, because you show the people that you are not simply this aloof figurehead that you get carted out once a year to wave at a parade and to make appointments and handouts, appointment certificates and letters of appointment and so on to people who hold office. I think that is something that it became extra evident, not simply because of who the president was, but just our society evolving to that point where we're asking ourselves, I don't think that in the past we had as many people questioning the role and the value of that office. And again, it doesn't necessarily come about as a result of who the person is, but I think it's just the way our society is moving forward and what we want to see. And so those are some of the things that stand out to me from this past, term of office of the president.
I can jump in here, Chris. Sorry.
Go ahead, Surprise.
Okay. Seeing that the Senator Jayanti enlightened us on her aspect of things, right? My question directed at Dr. Vishnu, in that is it that the president has too much powers, Dr. Vishnu? And I say this, for example, the president has immunity from any legal action against that office holder. So, for example, with this alleged stepping out of the Constitution and not providing a list to Parliament, etc., etc. Do you think, in your opinion, that the president, that everybody should be like complying with the law, and that the law should apply to everybody? One, and do you think that the president has too much of powers in that office? Paula?
Well, the thing about it is, again, we operate within the context of the Constitution, and as to whether or not the president has too much power, I would say no, the president doesn't have too much power, because if you look at what the president has to do and has to for most, in fact, probably with the exception of the appointment of the 9 independent senators, in the majority of other instances, she's either directed by the cabinet, by the head of government, or after consultation with the leader of government, with the prime minister and the leader of the opposition. So from that perspective, the president is not overly powerful. However, in the context that you are raising the question as to whether or not we should be able to challenge the president and so forth, there are procedures within the Constitution for us to follow. And that is something that we have adopted, and probably the lawyer in our midst here would be able to tell us more about where that came from. But the point about it here is simply one that says that we have to understand the role as opposed to the functions of the president. And the role of the president.
Go ahead.
Yeah. And the role of the president is one where the president is supposed to be overall in charge, so to speak. And whether or not we'd want to put the presidency through the trauma, and I use that word in inverted commas here, the trauma of having every decision of the president being investigated and so forth, there are some attempts to protect the presidency from those sorts of things. And that's the reason why some of those things happen. Now, as Senator 𝗟𝗪𝗓𝗍𝗃 would have said, if the president does in fact go against the wishes of the population, then there are provisions to be invoked within the Constitution. And in that regard, that could happen. And we could have an investigation. An investigation could lead further down the road to other kinds of actions. But until such time as we don't get that, that investigation, we can't go that route. Now, if I may add one other thing here, of course, when you ask the question about the power of the president, bear in mind that whereas there are these procedures that could be invoked to query what the president has done or how the president has acted, we still operate in a bipolar society, deeply divided society, and party politics plays a critical role. And herein we have to come into the question now of how is the president to be appointed and the support that is required for the president to be appointed and how the president would act thereafter. So once we all understand that it's simply the president gets in there with the majority party in the electoral college having a greater say than the minority party, whether the minority party could convince the majority or members of the majority to vote with them for another candidate. That's a whole different issue. We'll probably talk about that later in the program. But as at this point in time, we know that it's party politics operating in the appointment of a president, and therein lies the challenge for us.
I want to also welcome some of the viewers that are viewing online on Facebook, and I'm reading some of the comments here, and one of the comments actually said, and I want to put this forward, it said that our president is just a rubber stamp, and I noticed that it got a number of likes. Now, you know, we speak in this manner throughout the few years that I've been involved in discussions like this about politics, that the president is supposed to be objective and independent, and but to me that is all an illusion, because the fact is the government of the day, whoever it may be, that majority gets to elect the president. So is it whoever they elect, is it really that, is there that sole independence, really? Is it just an illusion of independence? And there are always political lessons to be learned. You know, there are always lessons to be learned, and it may take political maturity to do that. I almost hinting on constitutional reform, Senator 𝗟𝗪𝗓𝗍𝗃. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think it's an illusion at this point of independence?
Well, okay, so a couple of things. Yes, in terms of our politics, as we say, the government has its way, the opposition will have a say, you know, because it's all majority, right? And so you expect that whoever the government wants would be elected. But what you do have is, or what we've had, I think, is a government so far honoring the principle and the spirit of our constitution. The constitution only says that to be president, I think you have to be over 35 and living in Trinidad for the last 10 years. I think that's pretty much all of us. Well, no, not necessarily all of you, me, and, you know, some of the others, but, you know, that could be anybody really. But the spirit and understanding the function and the role of the president, generally speaking, governments have chosen people who at least appear, nobody is entirely, and that the illusion is to believe that anybody is entirely, unbiased and have no political affiliation. Everyone has some bias. Your affiliation may change. Today you may like one party, tomorrow you may like another. We do have people who are swing voters in this country. They may not be many, but we do have it. But everyone has a preference and may have a preference. But the appearance of impartiality is important to the office. So that's the first point I want to make. One of the reasons why the only other office I know where you are required to really be and have that appearance of impartiality in order to discharge your function is that of a judge. a judicial officer. And that's why we've seen from Nur Hassan Ali to Anthony Carmona to Paula-Mae Weeks, have all been judges, right? Retired judges. And that's one of the reasons, because they're the easiest pool from which you can pick someone who has displayed for the length and breadth of their career a certain amount of impartiality. They could not discharge their functions as judges had they not done so. So that's you know, the thing about it, the illusion. I don't think it's an illusion per se. I think what is required is not to find somebody who has no political affiliation, because that is impossible, but it's to have someone who has at least appears to be that way. The second thing I want to get to is the rubber stamp. I hear that all the time as well. It does nothing, etc. Let me tell you something. One of the most important functions that the president discharges, and this has, you know, it really creates a wave that carries into everything. It is a trigger point of everything that moves from it. There's like a domino effect, if you want to call it that, is the appointment of independent senators. Because in the parliament, and we saw it this year with that bail bill, what prevented the government from passing a piece of legislation that they needed to pass with a specific majority? And of course, as most people would know, once a bill interferes with certain fundamental rights and freedoms under the Constitution, you need certain majorities, depending on you know, whether it's 2/3 or 3/5 and so on. And in order to amend certain parts of the Constitution, you also need a majority. And what prevents certain bills from being passed in the Senate is really the vote of the independent senators. And that is why that role of the president in appointing independent senators has, as I say, a domino effect throughout the country, because without an independent president, you will not have independent, you may not have, I don't say well, you may not have independent senators. And if you do not have independent senators, that is the last sort of barrier you have to the parliament and the executive becoming one. What separates the parliament from the executive? But the executive is the government, they have their way, right? They have a cabinet, they run the country, they're in charge of the ministries, they're in charge of the treasury, they spend money how they want, they pass their budgets, etc. The parliament is where the people's representatives have their say. But the only thing that makes the parliament as a lawmaking body different from the executive is that independent bench. And so that is the most important part. So it is not a rubber stamp. I know a lot of people feel that they can't do anything to block, you know, legislation from being proclaimed if you don't agree with it, etc., etc. With simple majority legislation, that may be true. But with special majority legislation, you really do need, you know, that independent bench to be fiercely independent. And so that's an issue there. You touched on the issue of constitutional reform, Chris. I think, of course, every time we have certain appointments being made, or we have issues that have such as, you know, the issue with the Police Service Commission and others that would come up from time to time, we discuss constitutional reform. I'll just say that, you know, under the partnership administration, there was an entire commission appointed. They actually have a report. Unfortunately, constitutional reform is not something that can be done in a 5-year cycle. I think it requires a lot more thought, consultation. You don't just get up one morning and rewrite your constitution that you've had for 60 years. You do need a lot of consultation. You need to look at what works for you. I would have, of course, my own views on, you know, things like that. But I think that it is really important for us as a people to understand what we need, what we want, and what would serve us best. The American model, for example, that exists, it's not perfect, but there are quite a bit more checks and balances. And you have elected people not necessarily serving in your cabinet. You have senators and representatives of the House being elected. So you have a lot more representation. You have proportional representation. Lots of issues like that that can really change the face of our political representation and our governance. And all of those things, they cannot happen overnight. As I said, I don't even think they can happen within a 5-year cycle. It's not a problem that could be solved or resolved in a 5-year term. But I do think that further discussion, consultation, and action is needed in that regard.
If you had to grade the president, despite all of the again, as I said recently, the old talk, because yes, it's very important that the role, and I hope that the persons that are viewing that I think it's available quite recently. I googled it, the role and the functions of the president, and there's a laundry list of things that you can read. Of course, time wouldn't allow us to read that entire list. But if you had to grade this president based on her performance during her tenure, what grade would you give her?
I don't want to say like an A, B, C, D, E, whatever. What I would say is that I don't think a president has ever created so much conversation amongst all citizens with respect to the value of the office, and that speaks volumes. I think there was a certain amount of aloofness, and I say this again because we are not, look, in my grandfather's time, this president would have been seen as, because we put a lot of emphasis, I think, in the past on decorum and, as I said, ceremonial type office and what you want to see. And of course, nobody wants to see a Wajang president. You want someone who is, yeah, I'm not going to say because I see smoking. I know you probably think I want to say we have other people in the office who fit that bill, but I wouldn't do that here. But nobody wants to see a president who brings the office into disrepute. You want to see someone who can conduct themselves and carry themselves in a particular way. But I think that we have evolved beyond that desire as a people. And I think that there was a lack of responsiveness from the office of the president in terms of making the president into someone that people of this country valued, and that may not have been necessary under previous presidencies, but we as a people, we are moving forward and we are thinking differently. And remember, access to information is a hell of a thing. All right. And when you have when everybody has a smartphone, everybody has access to the internet, everybody sees their leaders being like Jacinda Ardern and so on. You want that for yourself. A lot of the people in my generation, my age group, who are like me, I think, at least educated to the level of first degree or even beyond that, who work in that middle income type jobs and all of that. We are turned off by aloofness. We are turned off by people who see their role as just to operate within the four corners of the Constitution and do what is necessary. We want people to show their personality. We want views. We want you to say something. Like I said, that issue of violence against women, I think a lot of women expected that the first female president would have more to say, that would show a little more sympathy and empathy. When you choose to speak on the day that the United Nations has designated as the day of International, Day Against Violence Against Women or whatever, you essentially cement it in people's minds that you're all about the ceremony. You only talking about this issue on the day that the UN say you should talk about it. I mean, really, that sends a message to the population that you are simply doing what you need to do when you need to do it and not really in touch with what is happening on the ground, what is the vibe of the people, and you're not responding to it. I'm sorry to keep making references to the United Kingdom, but this is where we get our
correct, yes,
from. And there was a reason why people call Diana the people's princess. She was the first member of the royal family, which is the monarchy, which is the equivalent almost of our office of the president, which showed that human touch. And we need that. We want that. And even the UK, steeped in their centuries of tradition, they have started to evolve along those lines. So that's why I think, so if I had to grade the president, I think that lack of responsiveness, plus the Police Service Commission issue really threw a wet blanket on the presidency. And like I said, I wouldn't give her I'm not dealing with the person. I wouldn't give the performance of the entire office of the president, a very high grade for this past presidency, simply because there was just a simple lack of responsiveness.
It sounds to me like you're gonna write in red ink pen on this examination paper incomplete.
Chris, can I jump in here with a small question?
Yes, yes, Sarfraz, you may ask.
I'll leave it open for Dr. Vishnu or Senator Jayanti. One of the role of the president is when he or she has to assent to a law that has been passed in both houses. Do you guys feel that there's an undue delay from the president's side in assenting to bills that have been passed in both houses? And I say this in the context, for example, in the scrap iron bill that was passed by both houses, the president of scrap iron is asking the president not to take too long in assenting to it because of the amount of scrap iron dealers who are on the breadline. Do you guys?
So let me nip that right there. That is outside the remit, and this is why, you know, again, I think the office of the president would do well to be a little more active in their role of educating the population. There's absolutely no discretion for the president as to when bills can be assented to. That is something that the cabinet decides and sends it to the president for assent. The only thing is if the documents reach president's house and the president cannot be found to sign it, that is the only delay that could really occur about the president. So let's put blame where it belongs, rightly so. And I do think that because it's the president's signature that has to appear there, that blame is unfortunately ascribed to the office of president for things like that. But that blame resides solely with the cabinet and the executive. So that again, it would be wise, I think, for an incoming president and the office of the president. When it's the office of the president, talking about a whole staff, they have a staff. And the office of the president, I think, needs to be a bit more proactive in educating. If you want this office to continue to exist and you want to show your value, educate people about what is your role, what is your function. It do not operate within the walls, the high walls of president's houses where you're some secret society. Let people know, yes, this bill was passed on X day. We haven't received, the assent. Yes, when it was received, it was assented to the following day, whatever. It's just a matter of signature being done, because that is really a formality. But that proclamation of laws and assent and so on has to strictly come from the cabinet, and there's no real discretion on the part of the president. I want to say something else that I may have missed, and a lot of people don't recall or remember because the merit list fiasco overshadowed it. There was also an issue of the acting appointments and the amendments made to the procedure for acting amendments, which was challenged in court. I'll declare up front I was part of that challenge. It was brought by a private citizen, and that is because that happened simultaneously with the whole merit list fiasco and the Police Service Commission collapsing. And so we had a period of time when we had no commissioner of police. Subsequently, the Prime Minister made a statement saying that when the regulations were passed, sorry, and the procedure was being followed, the president raised concerns. Now, that shocked me because the president's a very experienced attorney, a former judge. Should the president not have been more proactive and done something at that point in time than just allowing a bad appointment to be made, an unconstitutional appointment? You know, what could she have done? Could she have issued a statement? It may not be in line with the protocol that we've come to accept in a ceremonial office, but I felt that ought to have been done, and I felt that that would have been a prime example of where, you see, the president doesn't have a choice but to assent to things when they come before her. But if she's reviewing it and she picks up something that's wrong, saying after the fact, after an entire matter has been brought before the court, there's a challenge, the law has been struck down, you now have an issue where we can't even have a police commissioner appointed and so on. Saying after the fact that, well, I picked up on it, and I thought that there was something wrong with the procedure, etc. Why did you not say something publicly? Why did you not advise and so on? As I said, it may not be the protocol that we've come to expect, but I think it would have gone a long way in showing the population that the president still has some value. And I think that is an example of something during this presidency that also stands out a little bit with me, and that I saw as a missed opportunity, a serious missed opportunity to show that there's value to that office.
Dr. Raghunath, so the cards are on the table now. We have seen the government's choice of nominee for president as well as the opposition, but let's stick to the government's choice of current Senate President Christine Kangaroo. What are your take? What's your take on this? What are your views on this?
Okay, before I answer that question, can I just add something to what Senator 𝗟𝗪𝗓𝗃 would have said earlier? Bear in mind, we have had several presidents in this country. I know some of them might be a little bit before some of your times. But if we go back to President Robinson, when President Robinson had refused to follow the Constitution and appoint the nominees as the Prime Minister 𝗍𝗶𝗁𝗍𝗶 would have made in the year 2000. One of the things that we found out, and one of the things that happened as a result of that, was simply that a lot of people were forced to go and read the Constitution. And in a way, that was educating the population, or his actions, while he ultimately had to follow the Constitution and appoint the people who the Prime Minister had nominated. But the point about it is that his actions in itself had helped in the process of educating. And when we talk about educating and the population about the role and functions of the president, the importance of the presidency, and all of those things, that is part of our societal discourse that we need to have. Now, I'm seeing on the chat here people talking about constitutional reform. Let me tell you something. Constitutional reform will not solve our problems. Constitutional reform could probably create more problems for us. We have a constitution right now which we don't even know, which we don't apply in the way that it should be applied. And it is in that context that we need to understand fully well our own constitution before we move forward. Now, having said that, let me leave that there. Let me come back to Shanta's question. The question here is, what is the government's position as relates to, how do I view the government's nominee of Christine Kangaloo? And to be honest with you, I was hoping that the government would have looked outside the corridors of its party and looked for somebody outside who would have brought some degree of consensus to the population that we are interested in this society. The fact that the government, and I think one of your co-hosts mentioned it earlier, the fact that the government has stuck with a safe choice. Because why they want a safe choice? Because they want certain things happen. And in that regard, that safe choice will ensure that they could get certain things happening the way they would want it to happen. It is not necessarily in the best interest of the society that we have a safe choice all the time, because that safe choice will simply give more and more power to the executive rather than simply looking at good governance in the country. And I say that, and I come back to one of the points that was made, not in reference or in this discussion here tonight, but one of the points which was made in another issue that we have not touched on in tonight's discussion. And I think they call it now Nelson Gate, when Faris Alwari had promised, or at least offered, a presidential pardon. Now, here it is, a member of the government offering somebody a presidential pardon. Does that mean that his party controls the president and could force the president's hand to give that presidential pardon? And the safe choice that you talk about, that we heard about, I think it was in the Express editorial, would give the government that kind of position so that they would not be rebuffed by the president in the way that President Robinson would have done it with Prime Minister 𝗍𝗶𝗁𝗍𝗶 way back in 2000. And again, we saw it, Senator 𝗟𝗪𝗓𝗃 referenced the point when the president saw something that probably she should not have supported, but notwithstanding that, she went ahead. And that's the safe choice.
Now, Dr. Raghunath, earlier in this discussion, we mentioned one of the critical appointments that the president has to make, and that's the 9 independent senators. And now you are saying, or almost saying, that it is safe and it's a sticky situation that the country may be placed in because, of course, Ms. Kangaloo is from the PNM and would have served as the former member of parliament for Point of Fair under the PNM. She served in the cabinet on 2 occasions, if my memory serves me right. She also served as the vice president under the PNM of the Senate, and now the president of the Senate. The prime minister indicated that 2 things in his press conference. 2 things indicated that Ms. Kangaloo, somewhat she knows the job because she acted in the position.
He served before.
She served before as the president of Trinidad. She acted, and he also had to find somebody who was willing. Do you think he's justified in his position?
Well, you see that second part? Getting somebody who is willing. There are many people who are willing. Question is, would you really trust them? And that is one of the concerns that any prime minister will have. That's the same concern, for instance, a prime minister would have, or the leader of the opposition would have in determining who their senators will be. Because they have to find somebody who they could trust, who who will not be a loose cannon, literally, and throw a spanner in the wheel every time they want to go forward. Now,
you know, it's funny.
I will come back to that. I will come back to that when Shanta asked me the other side of the coin.
But it's funny because when he said willing, it's funny how you interpret it. It's for him to trust the president. I interpret it as no one wanted to, at this time, would like to be associated because of perhaps maybe some of the scandals that would have occurred with the appointment of Her Excellency 𝗕𝗓𝗄𝗍. So I thought of it in that scenario where that particular person that he may be approached, I'm just saying hypothetically that they were not willing. But Senator Lakshmi, you sit in the Senate. You sit in the Senate, and of course, I think I heard on a program I was listening recently, and you were named one of the high-performing senators, I think, as the yeah, right. I can't remember which program it was, but I listened to it. So people, we welcome your contributions, and I heard a lot of substance, and I never forgot the first piece of legislation in debate was the mask law, and I was, it was very, very not just pleased, but to see that level of debate and that content that was brought, and is always brought consistently. It's really good. But you sit in the Senate, you have your other 5 members who sit there with you on the opposition bench. And of course, you would have been, I assume every Monday morning, you go before a judge or a magistrate at times. So, you understand the role of a presiding officer very well. There is that discussion from the opposition bench that while Ms. Kangaloo served as the president of the Senate, she may have been biased to the government.
Yeah, I mean, there were instances for sure. In fact, I believe that at one point in time, it may, and it's funny, it may still be on the order paper coming up, a private member's motion to basically, being moved by the opposition bench. I think it was Senator 𝗲𝗏 moving the motion and putting it there to deal with the obvious bias being shown by the sitting president towards the opposition. Again, I don't like to get personal with people, but when you look at the history, it is part of the you don't fall from the sky. You come from a family, you come from a background, you have a professional background and so on. And I think it's all of this put together is what makes the nomination of the current president of the Senate so objectionable to the opposition. Dr. Rowley tried to say, well, she's not a member of the cabinet when you're sitting in the Senate. Again, I wonder sometimes if people understand the Constitution and how senators arrive there. The government picks 16, the opposition picks 6, and then 9 come from the president. Of that number, you elect a president of the Senate. So the president of the Senate isn't voted in by the population. They come from the 16 of the government. One of their 16 sits there. So the president of the Senate arrived in the Senate. Christine Kangaloo arrived in the Senate the same way I did. She is as independent of the PNM as I am of the UNC. You understand what I'm saying? So saying that she was the president and not what makes her different from a senator who doesn't hold a ministerial portfolio.
Senator Dr. Ibrahim.
Well, Dr. Ibrahim, or you have this new Lawrence Hislop, or you have Laura Lizama Leasing. What makes her different from them is just the point that she was elected president. You had the previous vice president now being appointed as a minister, a junior minister in agriculture. So you understand that the thing about being the president or the vice president doesn't remove you from the political party. You come out of the bowels of the party. You are appointed there. They are appointed in the same way the opposition senators are appointed. But then you are elected because, of course, your party has a majority. So they choose you and they put you there to sit as the president. So you are not independent because you hold the office of president. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, this is not just someone who came into the Senate, and the Senate is often seen as, more focused on policy and less about the politics and whatever. But you have someone who actually served in the lower house, who campaigned, who was elected to serve in the lower house as a member of parliament.
Even introduced the prime minister on a PNM political platform just a few days before the election. She was the only one in the PNM that introduced them. I researched it for tonight's.
Well, I see. I didn't even know that. But yes, you have somebody who was involved in active politics not so long ago, 2007 election. I think she ran. I mean, that's within all of our, fairly recent memory. You served in the cabinet under Patrick Manning. You, and I don't like to get into people's personal lives and so on, but I saw one newspaper soliciting opinions on the nomination and so on. And they said, well, we asked the former education minister, which is the former education minister who served in the last Rowley cabinet, Anthony Garcia. That's her father-in-law. You understand? That's the woman's father-in-law. You ask her, the former education minister, we asked his being, so I was caught by surprise. That's her husband, who was also interviewed by the newspaper. That's his father. Are you telling me that your father-in-law is sitting in the cabinet of the prime minister, who will now be the prime minister, who you are the president? Does that really? And again, I'm not saying the person. I don't have a problem per se with any particular person, say, well, this one bad or that one good or whatever. I don't get personal, right? I think you all know that of me by now. But what does it say to the population if your family has been, or you have been, and you've served as a minister, and you've served in a cabinet, and your family members, your close family members are serving as cabinet members just recently under this prime minister? You understand? Does it inspire confidence in the population that you are independent and that you will act independently? And Dr. Raghunath read my mind, because I wanted to bring up that issue of Nelson Gate. We have right now a situation where it is being challenged in court. It is before the court, this agreement where it was offered. Now, are we going to see a new president with political baggage, as I call it? I think that's the kindest term I could come up with, political baggage or political affiliation from her past, being asked to give an immunity to Mr. Vincent Nelson, to allow this whole thing, because the government has been put into a very precarious position by Mr. Nelson, taking them to court to enforce this secret indemnity agreement. Will a presidential pardon that gets rid of his conviction in Trinidad and Tobago make this whole thing go away for them? And will a future president be called upon or be asked by? There's a mercy committee that sits. The Attorney General, the DPP, the Minister, I think, of National Security may sit on that committee. But are we going to see a president exercising that discretion? I'm putting it out there. That is one of the things we have to watch. Are we going to see a change in the independent bench, whereby very controversial legislation, such as that bail amendment bill, which was stopped in its tracks by the vote of the independent senators, are we going to see different voting patterns coming out of the independent bench? All of these things will ultimately, and I make this point because I have very serious concern over the way our population views the office of the president. If you have these types of controversial things happening, presidential pardon, different independent senators who vote, in a different way and don't really, as we say, hold the government to account and are sort of just going with the flow and all of that, and who in themselves may have political baggage from their past, will that bring the office of president into further disrepute? I don't know. Will it cause further criticism? Will it cause further disquiet amongst our population over this office and how it's being appointed and used?
Can you explain to us why those 9 independent senators are so important in terms of the majority in Parliament for certain pieces of legislation? Please explain to us that, because I think that is something that we are overlooking in this discussion. I have noticed that many persons are overlooking it. They assume all of a sudden now she's supposed to be objective and independent, and well, she'll wake up that day as president and she'll be independent, and maybe she wouldn't appoint 9 red senators, maybe pink, right?
Okay.
So explain to us what is so important, those 9 persons.
All right. So you have you have legislation which must declare, because there is interference with fundamental rights and freedoms, so it declares that it shall not be passed by less than 2/3 of the membership of both houses. Now, in the past, they don't have that majority in the House of Representatives, but for example, when the partnership administration was there, they had that 2/3 majority, right? They could pass legislation requiring that majority. So it's possible for the executive to basically control the lower house. But because no matter how many seats you win in an election, the membership of the Senate is fixed. It's 16, 6 plus 9. The 9 and the 6 are meant to be the 15 with the 15 and then the casting vote. So if something is tied, the president has the casting vote, right? Of course, again, because the president comes from the government, you kind of expect them to go that way, but you also expect, and this is, again, it's a tradition, it may not be written, but it's a tradition that the president will justify, and you have a lot of learning as to how the presiding officer is supposed to cast their votes and all of that. Anyway, be that as me, the whole point of when the framers of the Constitution designed our Senate, it was that no matter what you could push through the lower house, when it comes to the upper house, you with legislation requiring a special majority, you had to be able to convince at least some of the independent senators. Otherwise, your legislation could not be passed. All right. And again, I'll give you 2 examples from my time. The amendments to the procurement bill, which the opposition was very much against. We were not able to get enough independent senators to vote against it, and so it was passed. And that is amendments to the procurement legislation, which basically removed certain things like legal fees and other things from the purview of the procurement regulator, which we're still waiting on to be operationalized, just as an aside. But yeah, so that was something that we in the opposition felt very strongly about, but it was passed because the independent senators, a substantial number of them abstained, and then there was one who voted with, and it was able to pass. All right. The other example, as I mentioned before, the bail bill, interfering with fundamental rights and freedoms, it was actually voted down. It was introduced in the Senate because I think the government knew they don't have that 2/3 below, so they needed to know if they'll get the 2/3 upstairs. Came upstairs, they were not able to get it. It was shut down, it was voted out. That's how we ended, I think, the last term earlier this year in July. And I think it sent a very strong message that when it comes to legislation being effective and legislation which interferes with rights for a specific reason, that the country was demanding evidence that it was working, because if you follow that debate, that's what a lot of the independent senators spoke about, that they did not see this legislation working, and so they refused to support it. That is the importance of the independent bench and the vote that they can exercise. And that is why the appointment of independent senators, I think, is one of the most critical and important functions of the president. apart from that, you also have, and I just want to mention, appointing commissioners of the EBC. That's very important. The people who are basically in charge of making sure our elections are run, fairly, free and fair, they are appointed by the president as well. So these are things that I think, I would advise every member of every citizen of Trinidad, go through your constitution. It's available online. Read it. See where the president has a discretion or where they don't, where they have to consult or where they have to act on advice. There are many things where the president has to act on the advice of the prime minister. There are many things which the president must consult with the prime minister and leader of the opposition. But there are very few things that the president can do of their own volition. And those things are very, very critical and important to the functioning of our democracy.
And if I may join there, two things. One, and we come back to that is why we say the president has to operate within the confines of the Constitution. Now, one of the things Senator 𝗟𝗪𝗻𝗪 referred to here, for instance, is simply the issue of consultation. And have we ever discussed what consultation is? Consultation could simply be the president picking up a phone, calling the leader of the opposition and say, Madam Leader of the Opposition, I'm going to appoint X so-and-so as a member of the Elections and Boundaries Commission. Whether the leader of the opposition agrees, disagrees, says, can I think about it? The fact is consultation has been had and the president could then proceed. That's one of the fears, that if you have somebody who is tied strongly to a political party, that they would only listen to one side of the discussion and simply ignore the other side. And that's one of the concerns that we had. Now, one Senator 𝗟𝗪𝗻𝗪 spoke about president appointing independent senators. I mean, it might be before some of your time. When I say you may be not politically active, but there was once an independent senator who stood up in the Senate and said, as a PNM senator, even though the person was appointed as an independent senator. And she actually said, as a PNM senator, confessing her portfolio one time. But the point about it, therein lies the challenge.
But Dr. Raghunath, let me jump in on this. The argument that may be the government's justification is that we have seen former Prime Minister, former President A.N.R. Robinson. He served under as a PNM MP under the NAR. It's okay now for Christine. Do you see that being the same thing? Because even under Robinson, we saw where he refused to give the incumbent the nod for Prime Minister and gave it to Patrick Manning and said, do you see in a similar, if perhaps Christine Kanglu placed into this position, do you see her doing that? Or so is it the same position on that?
So why do we go back to 2001? Why can't we go to 2013 when Keith Rowley was leader of the opposition and came out and said outright that he did not want Timothy Hamlet-Smith as a presidential nominee. And he was president of the Senate at that point in time. And so, okay. So, and what was the reason? Similar reason that I think that the opposition here today will probably relate to. And that is simply because you don't want somebody who was so closely tied to the politics. Now, Robinson and was an aberration.
Yeah.
In a way, I will not consider Robinson to be pro-UNC or pro-PNM. If you know the politics, and I think Shanta, you might know a little bit about my talking on Robinson, how Robinson became, how the NER joined the UNC in 1995 to take government. And bear in mind, the UNC was not the first choice for the NER, for the Robinson to join with the UNC. They were not the first choice. And I mean, the history is there, but of course it's not yet written in that manner. And that's one of the challenges we have. And so I will not go back as far back as Roberts. I would come back 2013. Let's look at 2013. What were the arguments 𝗕𝗏𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 had against a sitting president of the Senate ascending the presidency? And what are the arguments today? Is it much different? Simple answer to that question is no.
But do you see a PNM hegemony being formed where, and Chris, forgive me for saying this, but a second 𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 house being formed within all of this?
Excuse, if I may just interview, maybe 3, because if this, remember 9 maybe could be pink senators, burgundy senators, not red. Possibly.
But Dr. Raghunath, do you see this, or is it paving a way for a tyranny-style country?
Well, I wouldn't say it is paving a way. We would, if we get to that point where Christine Kangaloo is elected by the Electoral College to become the president, we could only hope and pray that the way she operates and functions as president will be in the best interest of the country. That is as much as I will say. I will not say that the president's house will become a second 𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 house, but what I can say is that there is that possibility that the people in 𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 house could very well be significantly influencing the output out of president's house.
Guys, the time is 9:01 right now. Now, I know we were scheduled for just 1 hour. Is this okay if we go over a few minutes? Is that okay? Yeah, that's fine. Now, I know the second nominee just announced, I believe it was yesterday, by the opposition leader through a press release. And her pick, the opposition's pick, and I believe she said also in an interview with CNC3, also in a press conference, that she had to meet with her.
We caucus on these issues, yeah.
Correct,
So,
right. So, and she said she has to, do her own consultation with her opposition bench, both in the upper and lower house. What is your take on her nominee, Dr. Raghunath? What is your take on the opposition's pick?
Well,
And don't hold back, because we have an opposition senator here. Let us know how you think.
No. I will not hold back. I mean, I would say from the point of view that Mr. Israel Khan is ferociously independent, if I may use that word to describe him. But having said that, and that was one of the points I was making earlier on when I said the Shankar's flip side to that. Is it a safe bet for any prime minister to want to have somebody who is so independent that they could be challenged on any issue and every issue that they may want to bring to the presidency? And that's one of the concerns that anybody will have, is Israel Khan a loose cannon? I mean, I'm using bad language here, but the point about it here is simply one which says, and it goes for either body, because if we have an election and the government changes and Senator 𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀's party is now in power, will they be able to control and Israel Khan? The simple answer to that question is no. Regardless of who is there, that becomes a real issue. Now, is that the kind of president we want? And that is another critical question that we may really have to ask ourselves. Not whether or not the person is the person who would serve that ceremonial duty, but rather whether that person will serve as that educator, that person who is enlightened enough to want to change the direction and promote the good governance of the country. And that's one of the things that we may want to bear in mind. For instance, if I may go back to one of the issues that Senator 𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 would have spoken about, when the bill was brought to the president objected, but the president did not say anything publicly, and went on to assent to it. sorry, not the bill, the act, and went on to assent it. In that context, President did what she was supposed to do. If you have an Israel Khan there, will he simply stay quiet and simply say, and that was one of the concerns. Now, whether the president, you need a president who is willing to have a rapport with the citizenry. Paula-Mae Weeks did not have that rapport. But again, Paula-Mae Weeks probably, I mean, who could have been a more quieter president than President Nur Hassan Ali? But the mere fact that Nur Hassan Ali functioned at a time when what he did and how he did it was what was needed at that point in time. When we came, as we come closer, well, closer to our present reality, do we need somebody who will sit there quietly and let things go, or would we want somebody who will serve to be that leader of the citizenry? And when I say leader, not one who simply sits back and or tells somebody go out there and lead, but rather listens, reacts, and then educates and enlightens the population. So that's the context in which I mean, I would support an Israel Khan. I am not sure Christine Kangaloo is going to do anything different to the way Paula-Mae Weeks has done it, and will operate strictly within the confines of the Constitution. Is that what we want? That's the question we really have to ask.
Well, there has been a lot of criticism to the office of the president, as the president is, and we spoke about this earlier on, as sometimes they can come across very almost muted on issues that they should speak about, and we want more. We want more in our political space as it pertains to discussions. But Senator Latchmedial, I know you're going to agree with the pick, because this is the pick of the opposition, I'm very certain. But what I may ask as well, what do you think about you all's nominee?
Well, I think that you know, I'll come back to how I started off this conversation about having someone who is more in touch with the people and what we require now. Dr. Raghunath made reference to Nur Hassan Ali, who was very quiet. He was actually the president of my childhood, and yes, I don't remember much being very eventful about his presidency and so on, but that was just a different time. It was just simply a different time. And what we need now, I would say, is an Israel Khan versus, I think it's what the population needs and wants, and would be much more engaged by an Israel Khan than by another Paula-Mae Weeks, which, you know, Christine Kangaloo potentially can be. Someone who follows the letter of the Constitution, do what they have to do, and quietly retire to president's house or wherever they may be. Israel Khan, for people who don't know, has had a very colorful career, and not just because of the work he has undertaken and the cases that he's been involved in. He has had a very distinguished legal career, very successful attorney at the criminal bar and so on. But he's been extremely outspoken on issues. And I do not expect that an Israel Khan, being given a title like president, would stop being outspoken. So that's the first thing. That situation that I alluded to with the bill, as Dr. Raghunath said, would we expect an Israel Khan to have not said something? Absolutely not. I would never expect an Israel Khan to sign off on a piece of legislation that he has a serious concern about, especially when it comes to the constitutionality of that piece of legislation. I expect that he would be very vocal about it. I expect that an Israel Khan would have a view and opinion on any social issue that's taking place in our society. I don't know how many people know the story of the Nehru color suit. Mr. Khan was put out of court for not wearing the type of, well, what he called the colonial style jacket and tie and suit and so on. And Mr. Khan made a point that the Nehru color suit was his, you know, part of his legacy, our culture. He challenged the status quo. He was brave enough to do those things at a time when nobody was doing those things, you know. He was really ahead of his time in those things. Is that the type of president we want? I would say perhaps yes. I would say, from the perspective of myself as a a citizen of this country who's interested in progress, who's interested in us moving out and away from our colonial past and becoming a people for our own self and follow and charting our own course forward and not being so focused on the past, not being so focused on our legacy, not being so focused on pomp and ceremony and so on, but wanting to revolutionize governance in this country. I would say that I think an Israel Khan could add a lot of flavor to what is an otherwise bland meal, which is President's House. President's House has become a very bland dish served cold to the population. That this is what it is, this is who we put, this is what they do. Don't ask questions, don't insult, don't talk about them, don't criticize, or don't have many expectations. And I think a little golden ray, a little flavor inside of that pot, inside of that meal will go a long way to encouraging the population to have faith in the role of that office and to show a renewed interest in that office, which, as we have discussed here tonight, does have significance and importance and so on. That is my take on Mr. Khan. I think it just in the very recent past, he has shown himself willing, able, and totally, some people may say uncontrolled, but I would say fearless in his ability to praise and criticize the same people, from one week to the next. He did it with the opposition leader. I think he has done it with the Prime Minister. I see him as being someone who is willing to call a spade a spade. He will give praise where it is due, but I think he has also been very willing to level criticism where it is due. Is that something that would have to be a little more controlled in terms of his language and the manner in which he does it if he becomes a president? Perhaps. And there will be people to advise on those things and so on. Will he take the advice? We don't know. But I do believe that that sort of fearlessness is something that you want to see, and it will inspire confidence in the population. So hence the reason why I think, apart from my role in the opposition, I do think it's a good pick. And I've seen a lot of people who are not affiliated to the UNC think that, it's a good pick, and it's something that could really help that office to evolve into what we need it to be a little bit more.
I have noticed with Israel Khan that he is not afraid to speak his mind, and he has criticized both the UNC and the PNM, and he has also supported both the UNC and the PNM where he saw fit. Now, I want to move on because, again, we're pressed for time here. I saw some hands raised, and I do know that we have a very vibrant Q&A session, usually sometimes a very vibrant open mic session. So I'm opening the floor if anyone is, I saw some persons had their hand up during this discourse, and so you can go ahead now and
Good night, ladies and gentlemen.
Good night.
I would like to go back to what the framers of the Constitution would have wanted when they framed the Constitution and included the president and their roles. It was supposed to provide an independent office that will assure some kind of balance between government and opposition in decision-making processes. And the job of the president to choose independent senators, as mentioned by both Dr. Vishnu and Senator Latchmedial, is very important for our democracy. Having a political appointee in that office automatically turns our democracy into something else. And it is important for us to remember what Dr. Rowley said. He said in his briefing that he wasn't able to attract independent people to select. And that tells us something about what is happening in our country at this present time. Independent people are not willing to be associated with the government and with the PNM for what has been happening in our constitution and all the misgivings that have happened.
No, well,
with the-
Trinity Bo and I see that's your name here. I might share in that view with you because when Dr. Rowley said in the press conference, and I said this earlier on, that he said that you had to find someone who's willing. I listened closely, and I listened closely to what he was not saying. And it sounded to me as though persons who are independent were unwilling to serve under him.
Exactly. If people with balanced ideas and unbiased ideas don't want to be associated with the administration, it tells us that we need to assure ourselves as a population that we put people who are unbiased there, not politically motivated people. That is where I'm going with this. And that is why it's important for us. Miss Kangaloo could be the best saint there is on the planet. And she could profess to be as unbalanced, as unbiased as she wants to be, but she has not demonstrated that throughout her entire political career. And in no way we can accept that as being, that office will obviously be a politically biased office. And when you have that office becoming a politically biased office, we don't have a democracy anymore in Trinidad and Tobago. And we need to understand that the population needs to understand that, and we have to stand up against this. This cannot be right. The purpose, the framers of the Constitution made an independent office, as Senator 𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪 said earlier, so that we can have divisions, so that we can have the appointment of these independent institutions like the EBC, like the Police Service Commission, and so on. And we have already seen influence in those offices with the past president that we had. And we can't be going from that past president to something worse. That is ridiculous. We cannot accept that.
Bear in mind that probably with the exception of 𝗓𝗪 Ali, all our presidents in the past have been, it has been suggested that they are politically appointed. Probably with the exception of 𝗓𝗪 Ali, George Maxwell Richards. He was campus principal, but his father was a PNM MP at one point in time.
No, but be that as it
you don't know that.
I think his daughter is on the national executive now of the PNM.
Right? So those are the kinds of things that we've had. And so his father came out of the bounds of the PNM. Other people came out. I mean, I will take the lead from Senator 𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪 here and not speak personally, but we know the reason why, or we know the background, what brought Paula-Mae Weeks to the presidency, and it has nothing to do with I think that
what the population is feeling now is that, because of course, yes, and with every president we had the world, he's a UNC, he's a PNM, this one is that one friend, etc., etc. Far back as, yes, I think 𝗓𝗪 Ali, when he's the first president, I can remember, and he's the only one that I think nobody ever felt had a political bias or affiliation. But the point is that now it's almost becoming so overt. Like, at least in the past, you might have been able to say, well, but you are talking about Christine Kangaloo, I think, would have served in cabinet with Keith Rowley, if I'm not mistaken, under Prime Minister Patrick Manning.
Yes.
You understand? I mean, how much more obvious and overtly politically affiliated can you be? And I think that is why the population is having this conversation right now, because it is a serious, whereas in the past you can say, well, his father was a PNM, and I was like, okay, well, because your father is a PNM don't maybe necessarily mean that you're a PNM, especially when you distinguish yourself as an academic, etc., etc. People said the same about Anthony Carmona. Well, he was friends with this one, that one, Well, that doesn't necessarily mean X and Y and Z, okay? But when you are there, when you've been there, you've been on the ground with them, I think it's a bit too much of a slap in the face to the people who expect some semblance, at least try to appear independent. And I think that's where we have a problem. Now, getting back to this thing about finding independent people, I'll tell you this, and I'll say it from my very little bit of personal experience. Offering yourself for public office is a really big decision. It sounds nice, you know, everybody, it sounds nice in the beginning, you want to jump on people thinking, boy, wait again, vehicle and this and that, and they think it's all these perks. And when you tell you something, putting yourself out there for public office is not an easy decision to make at all.
It's talking of personal experience.
No, I mean, it's difficult. You give up a lot. You make a lot of sacrifices, and you lose a part of yourself because you have this public persona and you have to, you know. But apart from that, I think that one of the things that struck me with that comment about finding people willing to serve and all of that is coming off of what we talked about grading the last presidency. The amount of bacchanal that happened with the last president, I think that would make it even harder now to find people willing to serve in that office, because we have arrived at a place where the things that happened, not necessarily because of the person, but the situation that she was probably put in and so on. And I still say that whole meritless thing was you know, was Rowley's doing. That's my position, really. And I think he tarnished both the person and the office in his actions. But I think that would have really made it difficult to find people who are truly independent and of course fit the overall unspoken criteria that we tend to have with this type of office, to offer themselves to our public. I could see a lot of people who may have in the past been interested in serving in that capacity saying, like, see, that's not me. I'm not going there to take, because the public outrage towards the office has tripled since the days of Carmona, Max Richards, and so on, maybe 10 times more than the days of Nur Hassan Ali, if there was any outrage then at all. But yeah, so I think that's something that we have to be mindful of, that what has happened during the last presidency would make it even harder to find good people willing to serve in that office, in that particular office.
Okay, we have a question from the chat by Edison, and the question is, by their choice, showing going to conform with the spirit of the 1976 Constitution.
Chanta, I think somebody needs to mute because we're getting a lot of feedback. Okay, go ahead. You can repeat?
Right. By their choice, the PNM is showing that they are unwilling to conform with the spirit of the 1976 Constitution. The people must get involved. Please tell us how.
Well, I agree. I think that they have really shown contempt for the spirit of the Constitution in their choice, right? Because as well, it may not be written in the Constitution that a person who was an elected MP and so political should be president. I think that was understood. So yes, I totally agree with that statement. How do you get involved? I keep telling people, when everybody, what we could do, let me go saying what it's doing, what the opposition doing. The power to change something that you don't like, it lies right here. It lies right here. You could put public pressure, you could protest, you could march, you can do all of those things. When people, I always tell people, I don't even know if people even understand what Section 34 was about and what happened with Section 34 and how it was fixed and what it was meant to achieve and what happened and what was done. But you could still see people expressing this outrage over Section 34. I remember people marching up and down the place over Section 34, etc. Those things help, but the ultimate way that you express your political displeasure and disapproval is by voting. So if people aren't willing to express that displeasure when elections are called, then I'm sorry, but that's just something you're going to have to live with. You know, it may not happen immediately, but when an election is called, you don't judge on what happens on the amount of hampers and food cards that are given out in the 6 months leading to the election and how much roads are paved. And that might be a problem that we have. We have a little short-term memory. We have about, what, 2-week news cycle now in Trinidad? If so much, 10 days maybe.
It's 1 week, 1 week. I mean, look at the _INSU. I mean, Christmas go on, everybody forget. We're in January. It's January.
Right, you have, yeah, I mean, look, I think that massive flooding problems we had just before Christmas. And with Carnival coming now, I don't think nobody remember flood, food prices, and crime. You understand? So in the 6 months leading up to elections, you always have massive expenditure. You have paving exercises. People forget that for 5 years, you're dodging pothole because in the last 6 months, they pave all the roads. People may forget because all of a sudden, you always get a election budget where a lot of money is pumped into what we call transfers and subsidies and social grants and things like that. And all of a sudden, Gates couldn't survive for however long. And as soon as you put some pressure, all of a sudden, Gates becomes more available. So you have to, they find the key for the Gates. You have to judge a government's performance on the 5 years and not forget. And I think that things like democracy and intrusions upon your fundamental rights and freedoms and things like that, they are a bit abstract. Right? So issues like this, people tend not to focus on at election time. They look at the basics. Infrastructure is a big one. Road, bridge, whatever. They look at, food prices. They may look at crime because those are the more tangible, everyday things. But when you think about, well, is this affecting my democratic right to express or to have an independent president, or is the separation of powers being infringed by something that this government has done and I mean, I get all the time people still cuss me about that bail thing and the bail cases and stuff that I've been involved in and the position of the opposition on bail in the parliament. But at the end of the day, we feel that it really is an intrusion, and the Court of Appeal, the Privy Council, everybody has agreed that it's an intrusion on the separation of powers. Is separation of powers to abstract a concept for the majority of the population to appreciate, as opposed to them people who get locked up shouldn't be coming out of jail. That's the average thinking. That's the average on the ground thinking, right? So those things lead to issues like this being swept aside because we focus on the absolute basics that we can pinpoint and put our fingers on. It's like the difference between goods and services. Think of it like that. In business and so on, they always say it's easier to sell a good because you have something to show the population. I want to sell you this phone, as opposed to I want to sell you my services as a consultant. I don't know how to touch and feel the services of a consultant, but I know how to touch a phone. Well, it's the same concept. People don't know how to touch and feel the idea and the concept and the notion that my democracy, my freedom, my whole structure of liberty is being affected, as opposed to I could touch this bridge and this road that they pave in front of my house. It's kind of like that.
No, I know we pressed for time. We went over a good bit of minutes now, but we want to get some closing comments as we wrap up. Dr. Raghunath, what is your closing comments on tonight's episode?
Well, closing comments, when you ask the question, I mean, we have two nominees, as far as I'm aware, two nominees at this point in time that will go forward into the electoral college. It's unfortunate that the government has a majority, and the government majority may very well support their candidate, their nominee. I would really like to see whether, well, I mean, I would never know, but I mean, probably the senator might be able to tell us whether or not another senator would confide in them whether he would support his good friend who defended him earlier on last year when an issue arose. But I would really like to see whether or not how many people will, of the independent benches, as well as from the PNM, would go vote against party lines. And that's my real concern. But like I said, I mean, unfortunately, while I think that the candidate that, and I agree with Senator Latchmedial that probably the presidential candidate that we need at this point in time is Israel Khan. Unfortunately, the way our politics is developed and our constitution works, it's like a very difficult possibility for him to overcome, and we will end up with a president in Christine Kangaroo.
Senator Latchmedial, closing comments.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it's almost basically a done deal. We do not have a history in this country of people voting against party lines, and that's unfortunate. What I think is that what I would like, and my hope is that seeing the way this process takes place and how it unfolds, and seeing that you have two choices before you and that perhaps the population would prefer a 𝗟𝗂𝘁𝗁 type president over another, as opposed to the other option, that it inspires and fuels the need to carry on the conversation. I said it before, that's again, our history speaks for itself. Once you have a carnival come around, people tend to forget things going on. We tend to not pay attention to issues. But I do hope that this is a conversation that can be kept alive. I will close in asking everyone to do a simple Google search on the Constitutional Reform Commission and the reports. They're available online. Please read it. Go and read it. It's a start. It may not be perfect. It may not be perfect at all, but it's a start. And if we are serious that we do need to change perhaps the way that the office of the president is functions, their powers, how they're elected, and so on, so that we don't have another situation like this, if you feel so aggrieved by it as we do in the opposition, then go and read a little more about what could happen, how things can be done, and continue to participate in conversations like this, because I think it's important for us as a people as we move forward. As I said, as we mature, we are really, we're not a young democracy, but we're a maturing democracy. And as we're moving forward, we have to really, it's just like life as you grow up. When you're in your 20s, you don't really know what you're doing. In your 30s, you kind of make some mistakes. And in your 40s and 50s and 60s, you're supposed to kind of get it right and start getting it right and figuring it out and making better decisions. And if we have to make better decisions as a people, it starts with educating ourselves. It starts with, understanding what is, understanding what we want, and coming together collectively and pushing for it, and moving away from simply accepting things either through just pure nonchalance or through our devotion that we've inherited from parents and grandparents and so on to one political party or the other. Start thinking critically about what would be best for the country.
Well, I want to thank you both, Senator 𝗪𝗻𝗃 and Dr. Raghunath, for joining us tonight on Season 2, Episode 1 of Critical Conversations. Tonight, we discussed the issue of the president and, of course, the outgoing and the two nominees that are put forward in the public's domain. As I close, I told you all I researched, very, very, it was a fun research. Let me say that. Google, everything is there, right? And I just hope that, and as you said, Senator 𝗪𝗻𝗃, that this may be a done deal. And I do believe that the government, they have the majority, and so again, as we discussed earlier, the opposition will have their say, but the government will have its way. So I will end on saying that I hope that Ms. Kangaloo will follow the gospel of the Constitution and not the gospel of what she promoted a few years ago on a particular platform. And with those few words, good night, everyone, and we look forward to speaking with you all again next week. Same time, we are now on Sundays at 8 p.m. So next week, we'll be discussing something else that is critical, and have a pleasant night.